would anybody ever play Kled in Season 12? Well, because he's broken. Hi, I'm Evandabank, and in this video I will teach you absolutely everything that you need to learn about Kled, from his runes and builds to his combos and gameplay, in order for you to finally become a high elo Kled main. Before we get started with the runes and builds, a little bit about myself. Last season, I peaked roughly 200 LP, playing primarily Kled top lane, and I've been playing the game since Season 3. Nowadays, I spend most of my time streaming over at twitch.tv/Evandabank, so feel free to check me out to learn more about Kled and top lane in general. I'm probably live right now, since I play a league literally 12 hours a day, so go ahead on over there once you're done with this video to go learn more. In the intro to this video, you heard me say that Kled is a broken champion, and yeah, I stand by the fact that Kled is actually a broken champion. He might not be the strongest champion in high elo or coordinated play where everybody is really good, and they know how to counteract the fact that Kled is an early game bully, but in low elo, Kled functions like a champion like Mordekaiser and Darius. He's able to get a lead, he's able to push it into the late game, and he can carry his team with his ult and playmaking potential. That's why I say that Kled is one of the best champions in the game, if not the best champion, for new players learning to climb in low elo. Beyond that, nobody knows what his kit does, and so nobody is going to be able to play properly against you. This gives you plenty of opportunity to exploit mistakes, get a lead, and get free wins in low elo so you can eventually climb. Before we get into the runes and builds, just a basic overview of Kled's basic abilities. Kled's Q is called Bear Trap on a Rope. Kled throws a bear trap in a target direction and deals physical damage to every enemy hit. This ability travels through minions, and after colliding with the first enemy champion, Kled will then yank them backwards if staying within the range of Bear Trap on a Rope after 1.75 seconds. His W, Violent Tendencies, gives Kled 150% bonus attack speed on his next 4 basic attacks, with the final basic attack dealing bonus physical damage, very basic ability, and Kled's E, called Jousting, allows him to dash in a direction, and if he dashes through a champion, he can then recast his E and dash back through said champion. Now, we'll get into these abilities a little more in-depth later on into the guide, but just so you have a basic foundation, Kled functions like a fighter. We're going to want to have fighter runes on him, and our build is going to be mostly bruiser items because Kled does need to build damage while still being tanky because he is melee and a frontline unit. Now we can talk about the builds and runes for Kled. Kled has very minimal options, being that his only good keystone is Conquer. For your primary tree, you run Conquer, Triumph, Alacrity, or Tenacity if the enemy team has a lot of CC, like Maokai or Scion, and Last Stand. For your secondary tree, you have 2 options. The first option that I recommend is Transcendence and Gathering Storm. This option, obviously really hard scaling because Transcendence and Gathering Storm, they provide you with a lot of damage that helps to counteract the fact that Kled does fall off later into the game. And the second option is the Resolve tree with Demolish and Conditioning. Now, I personally think that Conditioning is a really broken rune and better than the other alternatives, being Overgrowth and Unflinching in its place, which are decent, but not as good as Conditioning. If you're in a matchup such as Jax or Fiora, where it is very unlikely that you will be winning the early game hard enough to gather enough plates to make Demolish worth it, I recommend alternatives such as Overgrowth and Unflinching. Now, you want to run Unflinching if the enemy team has a lot of CC, such as Teemo, and Overgrowth as a generally good rune in place of Demolish. We can talk about some alternative build paths for Kled, such as running PTA, which, while it's fun, I guess, is really not the best build path, and I wouldn't recommend any other keystone besides Conqueror, really. In theory, you could run Aftershock or Grasp of the Undying, but these runes don't provide him with nearly as much as Conqueror does. Kled needs damage, and that is what Conqueror gives, and so you are forced into opting into Conqueror almost every single game. For summoner spells, you have a couple of options. Obviously, Flash is a really good summoner spell, and you can run Flash with Teleport or Flash with Ignite. Now, I personally don't run Flash. The reason for this is because Kled has a lot of target access, actually. His ult allows him to dash to an enemy, and his E gives him the ability to actually dash twice, making it so that enemies have a hard time getting away from him. For this reason, Ignite and Teleport can be a really good option because the utility that Flash provides is sometimes wasted on Kled, given that he already has dashes to assist with this purpose. For Kled's main build path, you're going to want to run Gore Drinker into Black Cleaver almost every single game. Gore Drinker is a really strong item right now and has fantastic stats for Kled. Although Spite was removed a couple patches ago, which was a really big hit to the item overall, it gave you percentage total AD when you were low health, which was really exploitable for Kled, especially when it's unmounted. The item is still really good. Second, you want to build Black Cleaver. The item is absolutely busted, it has fantastic stats, and the passive Carve, which reduces the enemy's percentage armor, actually applies 1 stack per shell of pocket pistol. So if you hit all 5 shells of your pocket pistol while you're dismounted, then you'll reduce their armor 5 separate times, which would be 25% armor reduction. Now, there are actually some alternatives to Gore Drinker, primarily Stride Breaker, which is just like Gore Drinker. It gives almost the exact same stats, except it gives attack speed instead of Omnivamp, and attack speed is a dogshit stat on Kled. We don't really care about attack speed. It does nothing for us. We only attack really 4 times with our W passive, so we don't really care about the attack speed. The active on Stride Breaker slows the enemies nearby you and deals a burst of damage. The reason we don't care about this either is because we don't really have a hard time sticking onto our targets, and we'd rather have the healing from Gore Drinker. The Mythic passive from Stride Breaker is also just straight up bad, 2% movement speed. No one cares about this. This does nothing. Other item that we could build instead of Gore Drinker is Sunfire Aegis. It's a tank item, doesn't give you too much damage, but it's really broken right now. I've tried it a lot. It's not terrible. It's an option, I would say. It does a good amount of damage with Flame Touch and Immolate, but overall, Gore Drinker is still king. Now, for the boots, we have a couple of different options. Your first option is obviously Mercury Treads, which gives you magic resist, and it gives you tenacity. Mercury Treads is a great option if you're in a lane against, say, Teemo, who has a lot of CC, as I mentioned earlier. In most games, I'm not going to recommend Mercury Treads because the enemy ADC is what's going to be doing most of the damage to you in team fights, and most of the lanes that you're going to face against in top lane are going to be 80 lanes. We're talking Fiora, Darius, Garen, Jax. These champs, you need tabbies in order to live against them, and Mercury Treads doesn't give you shit. So you don't want to build Mercury Treads in most of your lanes. Now, instead of Mercury Treads, we could also go Plated Steel Caps, which gives us 20 armor and 45 movement speed. Obviously, good against AD comps, good against almost every single top laner in the game. The passive that reduces incoming damage from attacks by 12%. This passive is absolutely busted. I honestly don't know how it hasn't been nerfed yet. The difference between having tabbies against someone that auto-attacks you a lot, like Jax, and not having it is like having an extra 600 health. It's just insane. The other item that you can actually go, which I think is extremely underrated, is Boots of Swiftness. It reduces the effect of slowing effects on you, and it gives you 60 movement speed, which is more than tabbies or Mercury Treads. Boots of Swiftness, obviously, a great option against champions like Singe, where they're going to slow you a lot, or when the enemy champions are going to kite you, such as when they have a Shurelya's on the enemy team, and you're having a hard time getting onto them. Now we can talk about the items that we're going to build after we go for our primary build, which was Gore Drinker and Black Cleaver. There's a couple options we can go here. First, we have Death's Dance. Obviously, Death's Dance, giving you 45 armor makes it a great option against enemy teams that have a lot of AD. Death's Dance deals 30% of your damage dealt to you as true damage over 3 seconds. The problem with this is that when you're taking the damage and you're getting it dealt as true damage, most of the time, you're taking damage while you're mounted, and then while you're dismounted, the true damage starts ticking, and this is going to make you die insanely fast while you're dismounted. If you aren't able to get a kill really fast in teamfights as Kled, don't build this item. It's going to backfire. Instead, what I'm going to recommend is Frozen Heart. Frozen Heart is insanely busted right now. The passive, which does 20% movement speed slow, 20% attack speed slow to enemies around you, incredibly busted. Works really well against champions like Riven. It throws off their combos super hard. And it also has Warden's Mail that builds into it, one of the most broken component items in the game right now. The next item that you can build is Maul of Malmortius. Maul of Malmortius, obviously giving you 50 magic resist, is a great option if the enemy team has a lot of AP champs. It gives you lifeline, just like Sterak's Gauge, so you do not want to build both of these items together because they do not stack. Guardian Angel is also another alternative that we can go to Death's Dance. You only want to go Guardian Angel 5th or 6th item. Guardian Angel doesn't give you too many stats. It's really the passive that we care about. It gives you the ability to run into the enemy team with your ultimate, die while getting your team engaged into the fight. Maybe you get some damage off into the AD carry, but if you're feeling really, really useless and you just don't want to die immediately, this is the item for you. Not great. It's a huge gold investment at 2,800. Not ideal. Now, Gargoyle's Stoneplate is another fantastic item on Kled. The active Unbreakable gives you a massive shield that decays over 2.5 seconds. When you're dismounted as Kled, 2.5 seconds is massive for you. In 2.5 seconds, you can auto attack with your W up 4 times and get a Q off. So you can practically remount as Kled during the duration of the Gargoyle Stoneplate shield. This item, incredibly good. Next, we have Hullbreaker. Really good item for the split push, obviously. Good against teams that only have 1 teleport or have 0 teleports. For example, if the enemy Teemo is running Ignite and you know that you can just split push and win the game that way, Hullbreaker's a great item. It's been nerfed a couple times, I'm pretty sure. It's okay. I don't really build it that often, but I see a lot of Kled players do this. So if split pushing is your thing, go ahead, build this item. It's pretty good. Sorolda's Grudge, good item for armor penetration. Build this when the enemy team is really tanky. You're looking at building this item, 3rd, 4th item. Sometimes you build it after Black Cleaver, preferably 4th item, because you don't want to rush this too often, because they don't have that much armor that early into the game. It provides a move speed slow, which is really nice. We don't care too much about this, though. It's just a better option than LDR. Next, we have Sterix Gauge. Sterix gives you Lifeline, which is a big shield. This item sucks right now. They nerfed it really, really hard. Don't build Sterix. Maul's kind of better. There's other options. Titanic Hydra got buffed a while back. I used to actually go Gore Drinker into Titanic every single game when I started playing Kled. It doesn't give you the damage that it used to. It's not super strong. It gives you some wave clear, but Kled already has decent wave clear with his Q and E being usable on minions, and with his Gore Drinker active being usable on minions, so you don't need Titanic for the wave clear, and the damage that it gives you isn't as good as it used to be. Ravenous Hydra, better option than Titanic. Not a great item, still pretty good. Build this 3rd item if you just want a lot of damage. Not a bad option. Now, Yumu's is also an option. It gives you the lethality. Soul Mario really likes building this item. I personally have not played very much with Yumu's. It's not my favorite. I feel really squishy when I build it. I'd rather build something like Death's Dance or Maw, but it's there. If you really want damage, perhaps they have 2 ADCs. Build Yumu's so that you can one-shot them. Now, I almost forgot. The last 3 items are kind of niche. Silver Mirror Dawn, which cleanses all crowd control debuff, so it's the Bruiser QSS. It's a good item. I rarely build this. If you're against a champ like Mordekaiser, it's actually a better idea for you to build something like Gargoyles so that you don't die when he ults you, than to build Silver Mirror Dawn so you can just cleanse it. Serpent's Fang is really not that good of an item anymore. They nerfed it with the durability patch. Serpent's Fang gives only 12 lethality, while other lethality items give 18 or sometimes 20, I think, if they're mythics. I only build this against Ivern. Somebody has to build this if there's an Ivern on the enemy team, so if you are forced into building this, then go ahead. But if there's an assassin on your team, just let them build it. It'll be totally fine. Next, we have Chempunk Chainsword. Good for Grievous Wounds. Grievous Wounds got nerfed. I don't build this item anymore. If they ever get buffed again, build this item if you need it. Kled's Q already gives you Grievous Wounds. You don't really need it. It's okay. Okay, now we can talk about some alternative build paths, the first of which being Prowler's Claw into Yumu's into Sorolda's. Obviously, this build is lethality, so it has a lot of damage, but it's important to note that you're really not that tanky. If you're playing Kled with this build, you're functioning almost like an assassin. You need to hide in bushes, and you can't really teamfight with this build. You don't have the health and resistances to frontline with 3 damage items. The second alternative is almost the same as the previous one. Eclipse into Yumu's into Sorolda's, the only difference being that instead of Prowler's Claw, we go Eclipse. Now, Eclipse is a good option because the Mythic passive for Eclipse actually gives you 4% armor pen, which is way better than Prowler's Claw Mythic passive being 5 lethality if the enemy team has a lot of armor items. But if the enemy team has a lot of armor items, you probably don't want to go full damage with Eclipse, Yumu, Sorolda's anyways. So regardless, I don't think these builds are great. I don't think you should build them by any means if you're a new player. Stick with the Gore Drinker build. It will function for you a lot better. Finally, we're going to talk about Kled's gameplay. We're going to talk about Kled's W first, because Kled's Q and E are typically used together. Kled's W gives your next 4 auto attacks attack speed, with the 4th auto doing more damage. This ability is actually a passive, and it goes off cooldown the moment that you attack somebody. And as a result, you will generally want to keep one of your skill points unused during laning phase, so you can level your W whenever you need it. Typically, that spare skill point goes into your W whenever you engage your opponent and think you can kill them, or the jungler ganks you and you need to remount as fast as possible, and that's why you save the W point, to ensure that you can remount and that your W is not on cooldown at that moment. Kled's W cooldown actually starts to decrease after he uses all 4 strikes, not when it is activated, such as Riven Q. So if you want to cycle his cooldowns faster, use the attacks that the ability comes back off cooldown. Now we can talk about Kled's Q, which is his most important ability. Kled simply throws a bear trap, it goes through minions, dealing damage to them, and lashes onto the first enemy champion hit. After 1.5 seconds, Kled yanks the enemy towards him, applying a slow, grievous wounds, and a substantial amount of damage. Typically, this ability is paired with Kled's E, and you can EQ combo to reliably hit your Q a lot more of the time. While you might think that enemies that have dashes such as Akali and Jax could easily dash out of the way, the reaction time that they need to dodge an EQ combo from Kled is really unrealistic, and at low elos, you're rarely going to ever see anybody dodge this combo. The first dash from Kled cannot go through walls. However, his E2 can be used to follow an enemy over a wall. So make sure that you are ready to save his E2 if an enemy is about to try to flash and run away or use a blast cone, for example. His E1, although most people don't know this, actually gives him a small amount of movement speed, which helps with his sticking power, and so you'll never need that Q slow in order to stick on your opponent reliably. Now we get to talk about the most complicated part of Kled, his passive, which is what makes him both a menace in low elo and have an insane amount of outplay potential in high elo. Kled is mounted on top of his mount Skarl, and Skarl's health is showcased by the yellow health on the right side of Kled's HP bar. When Skarl's yellow health reaches 0, Skarl runs away and Kled becomes dismounted, and in order to remount onto Skarl, you need to fill up Kled's courage, which is his resource on the lower bar to 100. Kled's dismounted Q, Pocket Pistol, shoots 5 shells out of Kled's gun and causes him to recoil backwards 300 units. This ability has 2 charges, which have a really long recharge time that decrease with level. Now, it's very rare that you will be dismounted long enough to recharge an extra use of his Pocket Pistol and be able to Q somebody 3 times. Kled does actually recharge his Q after he becomes remounted on Skarl, so keep this in mind. When you become dismounted on Kled, it is not guaranteed that you will have 2 charges of Pocket Pistol. He still needs to recharge them while he's mounted, and so if you dismount too quickly, you're not going to have any charges of your Pocket Pistol available. Let's talk about some things that we can use to improve Kled's dismounted Q. Kled's dismounted Q recoil takes a really long time for you to travel back the recoil distance, but there is a way to counteract this. You can position yourself against a wall and press Q so that when Kled tries to recoil backwards, he smashes into the wall. This mechanic is really similar to what Kayn players do with their Q to clear their jungle camps faster, where they Q into the wall so that the animation occurs quicker. When Pocket Pistol goes off, Kled is effectively stunning himself because he has to travel that recoil distance. And as a result, it takes longer for him to be able to auto-attack people, and while he does clear some distance, he can't gain courage during this time. Now, we can actually use Kled's recoil in niche situations to be beneficial for us. When Kled becomes dismounted, he gains bonus attack range, and this can be used to kite enemies really effectively. He has 175 attack range, and if you have boots and your enemy does not, because Kled gains bonus attack speed when running towards enemies, you could actually auto them, Q out of the way, and use this as a short trade pattern if they don't have any way to get back onto you, allowing you to gain some quick courage without any danger to yourself. There will be times when you're playing Kled and you Q right before you're about to dismount, and it's important to note that Kled always dismounts towards his nexus, and this is because if you have your bear trap on a rope active on an enemy champion and Kled falls off of Kled and dashes towards his nexus, sometimes he will lose the bear trap on a rope in midair. So just bear in mind that Kled always dismounts towards his nexus, and you can keep this in mind when deciding whether or not to back off after falling off of Skarl, or to re-engage on the enemy. As I said earlier, Kled's passive requires 100 courage in order for him to be remounted onto Skarl. There are a couple of combos that we can use to get exactly 100 courage, but first I'm just going to detail how much you get from every single thing that you can do as Kled to gain courage. First, Kled can gain 4 courage from killing 1 enemy minion, 20 courage from killing an enemy champion, 5 courage for attacking an enemy turret, 15 courage for attacking an enemy champion, and another 5 courage for attacking an enemy epic monster. If you do the 100 courage immediately, because you're dismounted in combat and you need to remount now, what you can do is you can use your Pocket Pistol immediately to gain the 25 courage, use your 4 empowered autos, Pocket Pistol again, and then you will remount, or you can use Pocket Pistol auto with the 4 W autos, plus 1 more basic auto attack, which will give you just enough if you hit all of your Pocket Pistol shells, which sometimes doesn't happen, in order for you to remount. Be mindful of how many Pocket Pistol shells that you've hit, because this can be very important. Especially if you've been dismounted for a long time, killing enemy minions, and you're at, say, 52 courage, how much do you need in order to remount? Well, you're probably not going to count it out in the middle of the game, but just be mindful of the fact that sometimes the courage numbers can get a little muddy, and that you always need to hit as many Pocket Pistol shells as you possibly can. I recommend hitting as many as you possibly can by making sure the enemy is walking straight towards you. For example, if Camille is E'ing at you or Pantheon is W'ing at you, Pocket Pistol can be used then to ensure that you will hit all of your Pocket Pistol shells. Now, you can also use your Pocket Pistol to get out of the way of the enemy skill shots. However, this is going to make it really hard for you to remount, and so you want to make sure that you can just use your Pocket Pistol to hit the enemy and try to dodge the enemy skill shots yourself. Rarely do you want to use Pocket Pistol to dodge enemy skill shots. It makes it super hard to remount. Now let's talk about Kled's ultimate. Kled rides on top of Skarl like a ball, and then they charge to a target location, they gain a bunch of movement speed, and Kled gets a stacking shield as he travels. Now this is relevant because the farther you are from your enemy, the stronger the effect of charge will be, because both the damage and shield scale up based on how far away you were from your enemy. which, by the way, the damage scales up with the target's max health, which doesn't feel super relevant, but it does do more damage if you're hitting the enemy frontline, which helps a little bit when the enemy frontline is eating your ultimate in the team fight. It still does a decent chunk of their health, even though you're not hitting the back line. Kled's ultimate, similar to Camille's ultimate, is not super useful when you're fighting in the laning phase. There are a couple things that you can use Kled ultimate for to make it seem more useful. For example, if you're fighting against Riven, and Riven is about to Q3 you, you can use her ultimate while she's midair to cancel it, and so that she never gets the damage and knocks you up. You can also use Kled's ultimate to get out of an enemy gank by ulting to your tower or clicking slightly above on the minimap or on the top right corner of your screen so that you can get away from the enemy jungler, and just be sure that they're not blocking your pathing and that you don't die and look like an idiot. You can also do something that I call bumping with Kled's ultimate, which is when you're in combat with an enemy, you can use Kled's ultimate at short range. This allows you to cancel an enemy auto attack and reset your own auto attack. So you can ult, and your ult will reset the enemy's auto attack, effectively canceling it, so you can get off a really good combo in short range. And while this might not be the most useful ultimate during the laning phase, there can still be some value taken out of it, and so it's not horrible. Most of the time, however, you're going to want to use Kled's ultimate to roam to mid lane or to dive your enemy under the turret with your jungler. Keep in mind, though, that the damage and the shield scales up with distance, so if you want to dive your enemy under your turret, don't go overboard and run all the way to your turret, because then they can simply run into Fog of War and you'll never be able to hit them. But you want to be a little bit far away to get more value out of your ultimate. Kled's ultimate is really useful if you're trying to get your team to the dragon or baron fight as fast as possible. Champions like Vlad scale really, really well with Kled's ultimate because they lack engage themselves, and having Kled's ultimate can help some of these champs that are less mobile get onto their target a lot easier. Another common time that I find myself using Kled's ultimate is when I reach level 6 initially. You're always going to reset top lane at about level 4, which is your first reset. You'll look at getting a coal or perhaps 2 longswords or a longsword and refillable potion, but after this, your second reset will be level 6, level 7, or level 8. After this reset, you roam mid or you roam bot, use your ultimate to get a quick double kill, and then reset and go back top lane. Diving them at this point in the game is now really, really easy because you have the damage to one-shot people if you have a longsword or a pickaxe. And then you can use your TP to go back top lane if your enemy has a lot of wave clear, or if they're playing something like Fiora or Jax and they don't have a lot of wave clear, then you can just reset and go back top lane. This helps your team out massively, and it's really important when you're playing Kled that your team is also ahead and not just you, because your champion does fall off a lot really late into the game, and that's something that you need to consider. That brings me on to my next point, which is when you want to roam on Kled. Kled has one of the strongest pre-level 4s in the entire game, and this is because he has a second set of abilities when he's dismounted, and unlike most champions level 1, he can use his mounted Q, dismount, and use his dismounted Q, so he has an extra set of abilities that he can take advantage of, which makes him really, really strong in the early game. When you want to roam on Kled, you want to roam all the time. Kled's ultimate does make this really easy, but pre-level 5, the times when you want to roam is 3:15, when your jungler is going for the Scuttle Crab. If the enemy mid laner is pushing really, really hard, say they're playing a Yasuo, a lot of Yasuos are very brain dead, and they'll just shove waves all of the time, giving you a lot of gank opportunities to help them. If your jungler is playing something like Rek'Sai and you can invade with them, then this is fantastic. Or if you have TP available, it is always a good idea, even if you don't have ultimate, to run bot or mid and then TP back top after making a gank for your team. Sadly, after the TP changes, we can't TP bot lane after our bot lane has already started fighting because we can only TP to the tower, which makes it a lot harder and a lot worse of a summoner spell, but it still has some utility to get us back to top lane. We just have to run down first. Kled's dismounted Q, unlike his E1, actually allows you to go over walls, so if you're trying to escape an enemy gank but you can't quite get over the wall because you're still mounted, if you let the enemy dismount you and Q backwards over the wall instead of trying to hit them, you can actually escape a gank like this. This gives Kled another layer of ability to play super, super aggressive, because even if the jungler ganks you, you have a lot of ways to escape. You have your ultimate, you have your E, you have your E2, you have your slow from your Q, you have your dismount, you can remount in 2v1, you can Q backwards over the wall. You have a lot of tools that make junglers not that scary, which gives you the ability to play extremely aggressive in lane, which is what you want to do against every single champion in the game, with the exception of Jax and Fiora. Every single champ is abusable besides these two. Let's talk a little bit about how you want to play turret dives as Kled. Kled is one of the best champions for turret diving in the game. Similar to Elise, Kled has a way to drop turret aggro, unlike most champions in the game, very, very early. When Kled dismounts off of Skarl, Kled drops his turret aggro, allowing him to have an enemy teammate or his minions tank the aggro, or if he's already killed the enemy champion, he can safely leave because he'll become dismounted and the turret will no longer be shooting him. As a result of this, we want to build heavy damage early game. This means we want to rush, because we're going to be rushing Gore Drinker, we want to rush our Whip and our Caulfield's Warhammer before we rush our Kindle Gem, because we need the damage in order to dive the enemy as effectively as possible. Against champions like Teemo and Garen, it's going to be really hard because Garen has his resistances and Teemo has his blind, but against a lot of individual champions like Kayle and even Tryndamere, these champions are not that hard to dive. You can get off your full combo, Q, auto, and both of your E's. It's very simple. You can usually kill them with this combo. If they've taken even 200 HP, it's probably a one-shot. If you have Ignite up, it's probably a one-shot. Try to poke them down a little bit. Something that I personally like to do is use my Q on my enemy, run out of turret range while keeping the tether active, run back into turret range, and then E away after the second Q goes off. This allows me to get a little bit of poke onto the enemy, and it's important that even if you take a turret shot or two while poking down the enemy, your HP is really not that important because you have a lot of burst. You can drop the turret aggro, and the enemy having a lower HP is way, way better for you than it is for them if you have a low HP bar, because they cannot do as much damage as quickly as you can. So you can kill them a lot faster than they can kill you, making low HPs very beneficial for Kled. Common example where you want to use Kled ultimate is when you're coming back to lane and your enemy is pushing for turret plates. In my opinion, now there are many places that you can place his ultimate, one being in front of the tower if he's going to run up the lane, and the second one being if he's going to run into the jungle. I personally recommend that you ult in the middle of both places, towards the river on the top of the map, to ensure that if he runs into the jungle, you're going to catch him. If he runs into the river, you're going to catch him. And if he tries to run up the lane, you'll be in a good spot to catch him as well. This gives you the best chance of making sure that you can punish your enemy when they take turret platings. However, I'm still going to recommend that you don't always use your ultimate for this purpose, because most of the time, if you're too far away, your enemy's going to be able to run out of the range of your ultimate and you're not going to get any value out of it. So it's better to just save your ultimate and not always try to punish your enemy for taking plates, but it is something that you can do. Now I want to talk about the overall gameplay for Kled. Kled in the early game, yes, he bullies his enemy and he is a bruiser, but it's important to note that Kled has a lot of bad matchups where you do need to play safe. Jax and Fiora in particular are two brutal matchups for Kled that are almost impossible to win. Everybody counterpicks Kled with Jax. This is actually the champion that I would recommend that you ban, but if for some reason you don't ban Jax because you hate some other champion, try to be as aggressive as possible levels 1 through 4, and then play safe after that. There are niche matchups like this where you do need to play safe, and that's okay, because while Kled doesn't scale the best, he does provide utility for his team, given that he has a really good engage tool with his ult, which allows him to make good enemy picks and set the engage for his team, giving you an ability to help your team even though you aren't individually the strongest member. So in general, during lane phase, you're going to be playing extremely aggressive. This means that you're going to be trading with your enemy as much as possible, diving under the turret, taking short trades, bursty trades, it depends on which champion you're playing against. During mid game, I would recommend that you sit around your team. I know that Kled has a really strong split push and that you're going to want to abuse it, but the problem with split pushing is that your team is always just going to run in and die mid lane, okay? This is just how it goes. If you're playing in plat and you're playing in diamond, the team is not going to wait for you to be there. They're not going to let you split push. They're going to run in and they're going to die. You need to be with them at all times. You want to be using your ultimate to get picks in the river. If the enemy support is trying to take your control ward, this is a great time to use your ultimate and catch them out of position. In general, using your ultimate as an engage tool during mid game is a really good idea. And late game, be mindful of the fact that your champion is absolutely trash and that you can't do very much. This means that you want to be side laning, shoving waves, trying to get a macro advantage by shoving waves and getting mid, out-roaming your opponent, and stuff like that. You're rarely going to find a matchup where you're going to win the 1v1 late game on the split push, or a matchup where you're a lot better in the team fight than them, but it varies on matchup to matchup. And if you guys want me to make a matchup guide in the near future, then I can do that as well. But for now, guys, that is the end of this video. If you need more information on Kled, feel free to check me out at twitch.tv/Evandabank in the description below, or check me out on TikTok at Evandabank as well. Any and all feedback is also appreciated. Leave everything that you have to say in the comment section below. I read all of your comments, and I will most likely reply. It would mean a lot to me if you guys would smash that like button. This video took me 2 weeks to create. I know that sounds like a lot of time, but I've never made a video like this before, and so this was a big project for me, and liking this video would massively boost it in the YouTube algorithm. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys in the next video.